Hi guys, my name's David, and this is the making of documentary of our unofficial fan-made Stormlight movie. I've been a fan of Brandon Sanderson's works for a long time, and the Stormlight Archive is one of my favourite book series. Making this scene from chapter 13 of The Way of Kings was always going to be a side project of mine. But after releasing that video of myself in Shardplate in June, and the amazing support from the Brandon Sanderson community, I thought maybe I should just try and go ahead and see if I can pitch my idea for our university's final end-of-year assignment, which is pretty much us making a movie. So I decided to see if I could get a team together. Everything started with the pitch. Basically, I had to sell my idea. An integral part of the pitch is making an animatic. So an animatic is a crude animation of the entire film. It's a pre-visualization of how things are going to look. After watching an animatic, you should have a pretty good idea about the feel for the film. My original animatic for Stormlight was actually twice as long as what we ended up making. I wrote a screenplay that comprised of 32 shots, though in the end we only managed to deliver literally half, 16 shots. Luckily for us, that still held a bit of an arc. I spent about a week and a half putting the animatic together. I draw the frames in Photoshop, then edit them together with sound design and temporary music in Premiere Pro. I remember I was up until about 2 AM the day I had to present it, just trying to find the right sort of music that conveyed the right feelings of the different beats of the film. I found that public speaking is a really integral skill when it comes to being a filmmaker, or pretty much just getting your idea out there and wanting to show people what you can do. Then came scheduling. With the success of my pitch, my team and I needed to sort out scheduling. Basically, who did what and how long we should spend on each stage of production. First, we did all the pre-production paperwork. Not the funnest stage of production, but it's also essential. We made an asset list of every single thing that needed to be created, and then put a shot list together. Each shot had its own documentation, stating what needed to happen within that shot's duration, all the assets that would be seen, and the camera's cinematography. Now that we all knew what needed to be done, we set to work on the modelling and texturing. All modelling needs reference when possible, and thanks to Ben McSweeney, we had an abundance of concepts showing us an insight into the fantasy world of Roshar. We also scoured the internet, looking at fan art and any other official forms of depiction like book covers and posters.
The modelling is basically the creation of assets or characters for use of the implementation in a 3D space.
For animation modelling, first off as modelling, we have to create the assets. Every single thing in the film is created by us. We had to start from scratch and build our way up.
I enjoy modelling quite a bit. I've only technically started doing proper modelling last year.
I receive the assets from other members of the team because we're on a short time frame, so it saves a lot of time if I'm doing the textures for them, so they can continue modeling or doing other parts of the project. So to produce the texture for the objects, you can use programs like Photoshop or 3D Coat. So one works in a 2D space and the other works directly in 3D onto the object you want to texture.
I did modelling, sculpting for the Chasm Fiend and the Distant Plateaus. Sculpting in ZBrush, so a 3D, basically 3D version of working with clay. It's a bit closer to traditional sort of clay sculpting in a sense, which I quite enjoyed in the past, so I've done a bit of.
It was also during this process that I got our one actor to come in. I'd met Charlie earlier on in the year when I was doing some camera work for another film, and he just blew me away with how good he is at what he does. So I asked him if he'd come in and do some acting for us.
This was a totally unique experience for me. It was very weird to see my likeness as CGI. The weirdest part of it all was when Fonty sent me sort of updates throughout the project, and there was just my face on nothing. I think the film is amazing, largely because it gives me the ability to do things I would never be able to do in my life. I struggle to bench 20 kilograms at the gym, and now I'm summoning like 6-foot-long swords and battling in this armor, and it's very exciting because it's sort of, it lets, as a performer, I have like a wild imagination, and this film's kind of let my imagination run wild.
I used a method called photogrammetry, where I pretty much took a lot of photos of his face from different angles, and I used those photos to kind of stitch together a 3D mesh. I used the software Agisoft Photoscan for this process. It was a really fun experience. Then, rigging. Once we had the basic models done of any 3D mesh that needed to be animated, we sent them off to Duncan for rigging.
So the rigger is a person who comes between making a 3D character and animating a 3D character. I get the 3D model of the character and I put a digital skeleton inside of it, and then I attach controls to that skeleton, and that allows the animators to actually move the character around and bend its arms and legs and get it to run around and do flips.
We had a meticulous file structure that we needed to stick to in order to keep things neat and tidy. Basically, every rigged model had 3 files of its own. Its model file, its rig file, and its look development file. The model file is just the plain mesh of the model. It doesn't have any textures applied, it's just nice and simple. Duncan would then take this model and make a rig file for it. This is a new scene where he would rig it up and make it deform properly for animation. The look development file is an exact replica of the model file, except with all the textures attached. This is where we work on really making the textures sing, getting them to look as good as possible on the model. Now, animation.
It's animating can be a bit difficult at times, but it really pays off. It's nice to see something that was something you created. It's a still thing, it doesn't do anything, and then you animate it and you give it life, and it becomes something that people can watch and get entertainment from.
We would use the rig file of any model for its animation, but here's why we use the plain model file for rigging, because it doesn't have any textures weighing it down. A plain model is much easier on the processing of a 3D scene. If a model had multiple 2, 4, or sometimes even 8K textures applied to it, then that's more processing for Maya. And the more Maya has to process, the clunkier the scene is to navigate. Nothing is more frustrating for an animator than needing to work in a slow scene. It makes things like timing really difficult to get right. A working animation scene will only have the bare essentials it needs to get the animation done. And just like modeling and texturing, animators use reference whenever they can. If you can find reference of the movements you need online, great, but sometimes it's more convenient to shoot your own. And sometimes it can be kind of detrimental.
Oh, what?
Rendering. So each one of our shots had 2 separate scenes. There'll be a basic setup for its animation scene, and then a really heavy setup for its lighting scene. In fact, the lighting scenes can get so heavy with processing that we need to turn off textures in the viewport, just so we can navigate. Everything that is going to be seen on camera for that particular shot is loaded into the lighting scene. We cache out any animation from the animation scene and bring it into the lighting scene. In a nutshell, this means we pretty much record a model's animation from its rig within the animation scene, and then apply that recording to the look development version of that model that is being referenced into the lighting scene. Once everything's good to go in the lighting scene, we set up our render settings for RenderMan, and it's off to the render farm. Each frame can take between 10 minutes and 10 hours to render. It all depends on the render settings. We were able to optimize most of our shots to render about a frame or 2 every hour. But with the render farm, that means we don't just have one computer giving us a couple of frames an hour. We have dozens of computers all working on our renders at once. So something that could take us an entire weekend to get done on our computers at home, we could get done within an hour with a render farm. Now, compositing.
And the compositing, that's just taking all the rendered elements and layering that all together and making it look like a visually pleasing image.
When all our renders are done for a shot, we load them into Nuke, which is a really powerful compositing program. We load the rendered frames in as an image sequence, and voila, we have a moving video. Now we add color correction, a sky, and any other small details like dust or Stormlight particle effects.
So how I did the special effects for the Stormlight specifically was I started off with little point particles, turned them into spheres. I then made them, I added some turbulence into them so they were like more wispy sort of looking, and then I turned those particles into a fluid, which then turned into like a smoky sort of look, which is what we were going for.
Basically, we're just layering things up to give a final image. I also use the free plugin called Saber. It's available from videocopilot.com, and I use this to add to the Stormlight effects that Nathan made. In fact, it's actually what I used to make the Stormlight title effect. To integrate Saber into Nuke, I will take our renders into Adobe After Effects, apply Saber, and then export just the Saber effects into Nuke. I then match them up to Nathan's Stormlight effects, so pretty much everything blended seamlessly. Now, editing. So we would now export the final composites from Nuke in an image sequence and bring them into Premiere Pro, where I would have a running edit that I would constantly be updating. If any changes needed to be made to a shot, we would literally go through the entire process up the pipeline just to apply those changes. And believe me, that happened a lot. I would constantly be giving our music composer, Jordan, updated versions of the edit, so that he would have the best idea of the visuals he would be working with. This brings us to music and sound. So Jordan and I would meet up about once a week in the last stages of production. It started by me giving him the original animatic to work with. He would take into account the temporary music that I had as a placeholder and use it as a reference for his own original track. We would then discuss his work at our meetings, and I'd offer suggestions on things we could change. He also helped us out a lot with the sound effects, as well as the music.
You'll be happy to know that monster sound is made up of like 3 vibra slap samples, somebody gargling, and a dentist drill.
Yeah, everything on there is written and orchestrated by me. You'll probably notice that I was a drummer because there's copious amounts of percussion throughout the animation. I'll watch it, and if it has temp music in it, I'll try watch that as little as possible, just so I can get the vibe of the picture initially and what the director wants from it. And then I'll start putting in hit points, so areas that I think the music needs to change or shift pace or like point out and highlight. And then it's sort of just sitting around on a piano until I feel like something sticks, and then...
I did a bit of sound design myself as well, since it's also an aspect of production that can be really fun. And that's about all there is to it. Hope you guys enjoyed seeing how things happen. This method isn't just used by students, this is an industry standard method. So what you've seen here, our pipeline, that's pretty much used throughout the industry. At the end of the day, this was only really one depiction of how this scene of The Way of Kings played out in my head. You know, a story really doesn't exist until it's been imagined in someone's mind, and this is just how I imagined this story to be. I'm sure for all you readers out there who are fans of the series just like I am, you had your own way of how things went down, and I don't want to take away from that. That's yours. I've always found that one of the great things about reading a book is that it just feeds your creativity. You see what's happening in your mind, and my depiction of Stormlight is just what I saw in my mind. And in the end, that's what I love about reading, fantasy especially. You get to get away from the real world for a bit. Catch you later, guys. Hope you enjoyed it.